Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Arlington Democrats Morning Mug. I'm Jill Cayazzo, chair of the Arlington Democrats, and I am super excited this morning to be joined by Delegate Dan Helmer, who is once again running for re-election in a tight race, and Arlington Democrats could not be more excited to be supporting him and be working just as hard as we can to get him over the finish line. He is taking a break between canvassing and other events to speak with us this morning to just give us some insights into why he's running and just the issues that he's seeing on the campaign trail and to answer some of our questions. So without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Delegate Helmer just to hear how it's going and what you're hoping to accomplish when we get you reelected to the House of Delegates in November.
Well, Joe, I'm so glad to be here. I want to just say thank you to the Arlington Democrats, who are such a huge part of us winning this race in 2019 and giving me this real opportunity to serve our Commonwealth. I represent Virginia's 40th district, which is parts of Fairfax and Prince William counties. I live here with my wife, Karen, who's a Fairfax County public school teacher, our two boys, Harris and Aaron, who go to our local public schools. The very quick version of who I am and why I'm running and why I'm running again is my dad's an immigrant. My grandparents came here as refugees, and I grew up knowing I wanted to serve a country that not only welcomed our family, but gave us so much opportunity. And that desire to serve took me to West Point on tours around the world in Iraq and Afghanistan and Korea. When I came back, it's why I've helped build a small business that helped veterans get access to quality health care and works with clients to combat human trafficking. And it's why 3 years ago, we launched a campaign to put Virginia on a different course, a better course. And all of us, the Arlington Dems, we knew we needed to chart a different course because we thought it was wrong that as parents, we had to think about whether we're going to buy Kevlar backpacks for our kids just so they could be safe at school from a bullet. We thought it was wrong that Richmond politicians thought it was okay to tell women what they could do with their own bodies. And we thought it was wrong that our General Assembly voted time and again to deny Virginians with pre-existing conditions access to health care. And all of us knew it was going to take a lot of work to right those wrongs, but if that we got out and we had meaningful conversations with our neighbors about a shared vision for our Commonwealth, we could make real change. And that's exactly what we did. We knocked like 200,000 doors in the 40th district, many of those knocked by Arlington Democrats. We had those conversations, and then we unseated a 17-year incumbent in a district that had never been held by a Democrat. And then we got right to work. In the wake of like this global pandemic, we passed legislation to put shots in arms and PPE in the hands of medical providers. In the backyard of the NRA, we passed universal background checks and laws to keep firearms, legal firearms, out of the hands of domestic abusers. We got rid of the terrible trap laws that force women to undergo unnecessary medical procedures just to have access to safe abortion. We capped the price of insulin. We passed my legislation that meant that 150,000 or so Virginians who face the risk of hunger will ensure they have food on the table. And we did all that because it was just the right thing to do. We did it not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but on behalf of every single Virginian, because in the Army, I never asked the person sitting next to me in a Humvee how she voted. We asked instead, how do we work together on behalf of our shared values and on behalf of our country? And as the world fell apart a year ago and people were calling our office because they were scared or a family member was sick or they were about to lose their job or their house, we didn't ask them how they voted. We asked what we could do when we tried to make it happen. And to your point, that's why this election this November is so incredibly important, because this progress we've made on healthcare, on education, on climate change, and gun violence prevention is under threat. It's under threat by politicians who negotiate in bad faith and govern in self-interest. By folks who look at the chaos and incompetence of the past 4 years and embrace it, who thinks the violent insurrection against our country on January 6th was not only justified, but patriotic. Now, these are politicians who would force us into making false choices. Well, all of us reject the false choice that Virginia's being best for business means it has to be worst for workers. We reject the false choice that says that you can't care about teachers like my wife, students like my kids, and also fight like hell to get them back into the classroom. We reject the false choice that says you can't want our criminal justice system to be fairer and more equitable, and at the same time, care about the police who keep our streets safe. But we reject the tribalism that conflates accountability with cancel culture, that conflates public safety with tyranny, that says that only certain votes should count, and if the other side wins, the election is illegitimate. That's why we've got to win this November, because we on this call share a vision of a Commonwealth where having a job means dignity for you and your family, where healthcare is a right, where kids and parents don't have to be afraid of being mowed down by a bullet, where we support and work with the women and men who keep our streets safe, and where Black lives matter. So I'm really looking forward to the questions of everybody on this call, because if you share that vision with me, if you want to see that as the future of our Commonwealth, then we still have so much left to fight for. And that's why we've got to get out. We've got to knock doors and have those conversations again. Why I'm so thankful for all those who have given money to our campaign to make sure that we have the resources in order to communicate all that we've done and all that we want to do to my constituents in the 40th district. And if you've knocked a packet, I'd love to have you come out and knock one again. If you've given, ask you to think about whether you could do that again. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to you for any questions you have or others have on the call.
Great. Well, greatly appreciate those remarks. Again, for the reminder that we only got you elected in 2019. It feels like much longer, I think, because you've done such great work in the House of Delegates. And we were very motivated in 2019 to get you over the finish line, because you did unseat an incumbent who, rather than focusing on supporting his own district, often targeted Arlington with some of his legislative measures. So as we turn to the question period, I'm going to start, but definitely want to hear from the crowd and just ask you, from the point of view of your district, what is at least one priority that you would like to pursue if you are reelected in November?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have worked a tremendous amount on making sure that healthcare is affordable and available. One of my biggest concerns is that it continues to be hard for certain people in our district to get healthcare on the exchanges. We've done some good work around healthcare reinsurance, which is a boring way, but very important way to make healthcare on the exchanges more affordable. And I think we've got some more work to do there. We also have some more work to do on coverage. One of the things I'm passionate about is making sure that those who face infertility have access to affordable coverage to help them have children. If you go across the border to Maryland, because you're facing an infertility challenge, you have coverage for that. Here in Virginia, you don't. And so we're going to continue to work really hard to make sure that quality, affordable healthcare is a right for every Virginian, and we still got more work to do there.
Great. Well, it's terrific to see you so focused on an issue that hits close to home in your district. Let me open things up to the group that we've got on the call to see if folks have additional questions. Mark Teal, I see you there. You got any questions? Can't be on video if you don't have a question.
I guess one of the biggest challenges it seems like we're facing this year is there's a lot of voter fatigue. I mean, without Trump daily barraging us. And of course, I don't think our county chair has ever experienced fatigue a minute in her life, but for the rest of us who are more mortal humans, it's a struggle. And I think we'll get over it. But do you have any advice on what to do to motivate people to get back out there and remember how important it is?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Mark. We've had the most important election for our lives for 5 years now, and we've had it every year because we're Virginia and we're crazy. And to me, if you look at what happened on the Capitol on January 6th, it is just astonishing that we were that close to losing our democracy. And those same forces that massed on Capitol Hill on January 6th to stop a free and fair election, that for months put pressure on election officials who are the uncelebrated bureaucrats of our democracy, who we just expect to do the job. Those forces have not gone away. They're being embraced by people like my opponent, who have called into question, not just now, but in the past, the integrity of elections. And we just can't allow that to stand. And what we're seeing is that elections like mine are tight. We're running on lines that were drawn by Republicans for Republicans. I mean, we are effectively in a tie in this race right now. And so if you want what happened on January 6th, if you want the ideology, the incompetence, and the malevolence of the past 4 years to be the way in which Virginia is governed, then you can take a knee. But if not, that's what we're up against here. That fires me up to get out the door to do all of the things we know that we can do when Democrats have a majority here in Virginia, and to also make sure that we don't allow those powers, that darkness, to descend on a Commonwealth that has been a bright spot in a terrible time.
Call to action if I've ever heard one. Well, Arlington Democrats, we don't take the knee, we hold the line. So I appreciate you providing that extra motivation for those who may be feeling a little bit of fatigue, for sure. I think it's important to acknowledge that mark. But we're energized by having such great candidates to pull for. Let me ask a question that's come up, we've done a couple of these morning mugs with some of your colleagues, and one question or one topic that's really been I think top of mind for understandable reasons is the economic recovery as we hopefully are mostly coming out of COVID. Of course, the Delta variant is quite concerning, but on the assumption that there is at some point going to be a light at the end of this tunnel, and increasingly needs to be one for folks who are really struggling. How do you think that the General Assembly can help to support those folks as we move past COVID and look to ensure that there's prosperity for all in the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. We in Virginia need to be the future of the American economy. And I believe that we can be. We have the tech base, we have the connections to the federal government. We have become an innovation hub that creates the kind of entrepreneurship that can drive the economy, not just in Virginia, but nationally through the 21st century. But to do that, we need to have the policies in place that do two things. One, we need to meet that economy where it's going to be and be forward-looking. I was one of the chief co-patrons of Virginia's Clean Economy Act, which puts us on the path to 100% renewable energy in the power generation sector by 2045. I've passed a number of bills that help us to make sure that the infrastructure we build for public buildings is green and clean. And the direction that our economy and our infrastructure are moving is into ensuring that we create sustainability in terms of our environment. But it's not just good enough to create sustainability in terms of our environment. We've got to create sustainability in terms of the types of jobs we are bringing. And so we need to encourage well-paying jobs that provide a path to the middle class. That means ensuring we have, for instance, project labor agreements in place on public projects that ensure that there is a benefit and wage floor, and that we're not competing by driving to the lowest price that causes things like wage theft, but instead creating human capital through apprenticeships, through well-paying jobs, through ensuring that every single Virginian and not just a handful benefit from this economic growth and innovation that we're seeking to build to the Commonwealth. And then we've also got to recognize that as change happens, we need to be engaged with those who are impacted by that change, and not just talking about education programs, but actually investing with communities on helping build those communities in order to meet Virginia's economy where it's going to be. And lastly, I believe that we're in a Commonwealth in which no Virginian child should starve, should not have the ability to have basic decency in their lives. It's why I focus so much on childhood and student hunger, and it's why I'm going to continue to ensure that every single Virginian can live in dignity. It's not just moral, it's not just good policy, but it's good economics, because the money that we put into ensuring that people can live in dignity goes directly back into our economy and creates job growth. And so I think those pillars of meeting the economy where it's going to be, ensuring that we have good paying jobs, and lastly, ensuring that every Virginian has the means to live in dignity are going to vault us ahead as economy in the 21st century and allow us to come out stronger out of this pandemic.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Let me just tease out one point that I think also was echoed in your opening remarks, which is I think a really heartening focus on the needs of workers. We have a very strong labor caucus within the Arlington Democrats, and I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more directly to that, the right to work repeal, and just how we can support workers more specifically through reforms that the House of Delegates could champion.
Absolutely. Look, in Virginia, every single worker who wants to should have the right to join a union. And we have put a lot of infrastructure in place over the years that prevents that from happening. And so absolutely, there needs to be a right to unionize in Virginia. Absolutely, we need to encourage fair labor standards. Absolutely, we need to enable workers to negotiate safe labor conditions. And absolutely, we need to ensure that having a job means the ability to live a middle-class life. And that's what we're fighting for here in Virginia, because that is the essence of the American dream that my family came to this country and had the opportunity to benefit from. And that's my hope for every Virginian family as well.
Great. Let me pause there and see if other folks have questions. If not, I have another follow-up for you, but I don't want to dominate. So if anyone wants to jump in, please feel free. Oh, there's a question hitting us in the chat. So let me go to that. Do you anticipate early voting being as significant as it was during the height of the pandemic? Top of mind for me as well. I'd be curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the jury's out. It's a great question. First of all, let's just talk about, celebrate for a second what we have done. We took Virginia from being a voter suppression state to one that has made it incredibly easy for those legally allowed to vote to cast their ballot and make their voice heard. And that's something we should all celebrate. Giving people options to be heard is a good and critical way of ensuring our government serves the needs of every single Virginian. And it is amazing to be a part of a bright spot in a country as our democracy is under threat that has stood up and said every single vote ought to be counted and every single person ought to have a right to have their voice heard, even if we disagree with it. And we should just be proud as Virginians of all we've done to get there. In terms of what does it mean politically in Virginia, I believe that when you give people options, it provides opportunities for them to hear their voices. And I believe the voices of Virginia have expressed a tremendous amount of support for all of the great work we've done to lead Virginia out of this pandemic, to build back better, to make sure that there is a floor under which everybody can, above which everybody can live in dignity, and which we take seriously the science, whether it's science around disease, whether it's science around the environment and climate change, and that looks to create good jobs. So I think there really is consensus around that. And I think by allowing people to have their voices heard, we're going to see that in our electoral results. In terms of early voting, it's hard for me to believe that the amount of early voting will quite meet pandemic levels, but also our society has changed in profound ways, which I think we're just starting to understand. The nature of work has changed, the extent to which people are going to be working in person, particularly in white collar jobs, that they did before is still under question. I think we're still figuring that out. And I think the same is true of voting. I think we don't know whether people are going to revert back to the mean and like use election day as that forcing function to get everybody out, or whether with this newfound freedom to vote earlier, whether people are going to take advantage of it in mass. I just don't know the answer. And I think anybody who prognosticates and says, hey, people are going to vote in the same level as the presidential, 2020 early, or they're going to not do that, I think it's hard to say. I think the great thing for us is with those options, we really can do much more targeted messaging to those who haven't got out to vote and make sure that their voices are heard.
Yeah, but I think it gives us some flexibility. I think it's going to be an educational, effort that we need to undertake to get people sort of to change their mindset from I've got to vote on election day, or come up with a good reason to I've got this period of time to vote. I know we're excited in Arlington that for the first time we're going to have Sunday voting, and that'll be an interesting. Kudos to our county board and electoral board for making that happen so fast. We're excited to see how that goes, and we'll keep trying to make sure that that people have the easiest path possible to the polls. And I think we demonstrated last year that doing so does not significantly increase the risk of voter fraud, notwithstanding what Fox News commentators might want you to believe. But let me refocus us just a little bit here. I'm watching the chat for additional questions, so folks, please feel free to pop them in there. But I did want to go back to one of the points that you made, which I thought was interestingly put, about how we need to make sure that the economy works for everyone, and that, and I may get this wrong, but that everyone is able to have a dignified life, I think is how you put it, or dignified living. Make a dignified living. I think that's interesting, and I hear echoes of that sometimes in a different group that's quite active within the Arlington Democrats, which is our Disabilities Caucus, and their advocacy to ensure that the individuals in the disability community are really able to live full and meaningful lives within society, because they do have so much to contribute. And I'm just curious if any part of your platform touches upon issues that community is facing.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And again, a moral imperative. And I am very thankful for the disability advocates who have done such a great job of ensuring that we in Virginia are constantly thinking about the needs of every Virginian citizen, including those who face disabilities. And because of their advocacy, and in conjunction with their advocacy, I'm really proud of the work I've personally been able to do to ensure that party nominating processes are inclusive of those with disabilities. We passed a bill of mine this year that requires that every single party nominating process is accessible not only to students, not only to active duty military, but also to people with disabilities. And I think it's just so important that our legislation and our economy encompasses the needs of every single Virginian, and you can't do that unless you're also including Virginians with disabilities. We've also made some tremendous progress in Virginia on the disability waiver list for Medicaid. We're going to continue to work on funding that. I think there are some real challenges coming out of the pandemic. I've heard from families who I'm very concerned about the fact that virtual school was challenging for everybody, but was particularly challenging for Virginians with disabilities, and particularly challenging for those who were entitled to educational support up through the age of 21. And that year 20 to 21 for them has just been a lost year. And now they're no longer eligible. And so I think we're going to need to do a lot of work to make sure that every single Virginian, and by that I mean inclusive of those with disabilities, has access to a good job, has access to health care, has access to education, and that those capabilities meet the needs of every single person where they're at in terms of their own abilities and in terms of their own disability status.
So important. And I have noted your efforts to work on the nominations process, and really appreciate it. As a party chair, I share that desire, and wish that in some ways that the Virginia Code of Elections was a little bit more flexible, particularly with respect to school boards. So you may be hearing from me at some point soon, because I did note that legislation that you sought to have passed in 2018, and we may be circling around about that. But really appreciate that focus on inclusivity with respect to nominations and in general. I see that we have a question in the chat, or at least it went directly to me. So let me pose that, asking, for your assessment on VMI and its future in the Commonwealth. And I think you may be particularly well placed given your military background, but do you have a view on this?
I do. So let me start out by saying I think that the Commonwealth is benefited by having an institution whose primary focus is service. And I'm a big advocate of national service, whether that's civilian service through institutions like AmeriCorps, whether that's military service, whether that's community service through other mechanisms. I think service benefits the individual. It's something that's motivated and driven me. It's something that I think benefits society. I think it brings us together. And I also think there are real needs, whether it's in terms of disaster response, whether it's in terms of the environment. We entrust 18 years old to carry out our military policy overseas, and yet we don't always take them seriously here at home in terms of their ability to provide real capacity. And I think that's a mistake in terms of building human capital as a society. I think it's a mistake in terms of building a culture of citizenship and helping us get through these difficult times. And I think VMI has a really important role to play. That said, we know that VMI has not always lived up to the standards which we would hope that it lives up to as a Commonwealth, whether that's on issues of race, whether that's issues of sex. VMI at times has reflected a Virginia very different than that which we seek to embrace. I think the answer to that is to embrace change and to make that change. I've personally been out front in terms of demanding change at the Virginia Military Institute. I was incredibly frustrated when VMI intervened in a bill of mine working on sexual violence prevention on campus to seek to be the only school in the Commonwealth excluded from that bill. We're going to remove that exclusion. We also, at the same time that I was frustrated by that, ensured that sexual violence mitigation prevention is actually in the code as a responsibility of VMI. And I think we've made good progress in reimagining the heroes and the mythology that must exist at an institution like that, but must exist apart from the lost cause mythology that at times has permeated the campus. And so I am hopeful for the future of VMI. I think it's important. I think we are benefited by a Commonwealth by having a strong VMI. And I think that means embracing a series of changes that make it a crown jewel in the educational firmament of the Commonwealth. But I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, I really appreciate that insight. Well, we're almost at the half-hour mark, and for folks who joined late, sad to tell you that we only have half an hour with Delegate Helmer. He is en route to a different event. As you can imagine, this is super busy season, and we want to make sure that he is hitting as many of his constituents as possible. So I have to say, I feel like we got an interesting insight into the fact that you have an extremely clean car, and I feel personally ashamed because my car is covered in audio video equipment for the party. So
I will tell you what I have. What I have is a very messy trunk, and my passenger seat. You should talk to my wife. She would not agree with that assessment. I'm glad that we've got an angle that's given that false impression that this does not look like a campaign car. Well, it has been such a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure to visit with all of you. And if you can, I encourage you to go to danhelmer.com and sign up to volunteer. Give a little bit of money if you can. We have a hard race in front of us, and I would love to see you on the trail with us. I'm humbled to have all the support I've had from Arlington to date. And let's get out there. Let's keep this majority. Let's keep Virginia moving in the right direction. And just thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, thank you so much. Go out there and win. We're behind you 100% of the way. Thanks so much, everybody. Have
Let's
a
do
great
this.
day.
All right, bye-bye.
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 You too, Jill. Have a great day.